Aloha! Welcome to Science Never Sleeps at the Bishop Museum. I'm Hadley Andersen. I'm a science educator here at Bishop Museum. I'm here again with Dr. Neal Evenhuis. We're going to go over some of the things that we collected last week. If you joined us last week, you saw that we collected some insects. And so, Neal, do you want to tell us a little bit about why we collect things?
There's a number of reasons, and that's a good question, Hadley, because it's not just we're going out there and we collect stuff and bring it back and we don't know what we're doing. There's reasons for it why we go out there. Some of them are, I like to go out to collect new species. I want to find out what's there. And the flies that I work on mainly occur in rainforests, and so I like to get into the rainforest, which is a little cooler climate than down here in Honolulu. It's
right
up in the mountains, so that's always nice too. And I put out these pan traps like we did last week, and I'm often getting a bunch of species, and maybe one or two are going to be new. It's really incredible. There's hundreds of new species to be found out there.
Mm-hmm.
So these new methods that we're using, the pan traps, the malaise traps that have really fine mesh, some lures and things, all those methods that we're using for trapping insects can get a lot of new species. Now, it's not only that, that's one, as a scientist I like to find and discover new things. Mm-hmm. But we also get contracted by federal, state, and private people that want to know what's on their land for various reasons. You know, there's endangered species acts. There's all sorts of environmental assessments that need to be done, maybe. And so, Bishop Museum gets contracted by these agencies and firms to go to a land and survey it and make sure that there's no endangered species on there or any threats that may be there. So,
and if they do find endangered species, then becomes about how to manage it.
Right, exactly. Then it leads to helping conservationists know how to make some decisions on how to better conserve that area where they are, or protect that area where they are. So what we're going to do today is, just remind you that last week we collected things in the yellow pan trap out there in the native garden at the Bishop Museum. We put that stuff into a bottle that had alcohol in it, so we had a lot of insects. So this is just sort of a sampling of some of the things that we have gotten before with pan trapping and other types of traps. And the next thing that we're going to do is sort these, we call it a rough sort first, and that's into insect orders. And so some of the orders, you'll know the common names of flies and beetles and wasps and bees. They have scientific names like Hymenoptera, or wasps and bees and ants. Coleoptera are the beetles. And what we're going to see today, a little special one that not too many people see, are springtails. They're called Collembola. And what I work on, the flies, they're called Diptera. So we have our sample from last week. I poured it out. And as soon as the monitors come back on, energy saving, and the video things go away, live broadcasting.
Now, one of the things you told me off camera last week was we were talking about different species and where we discover a lot of the new species. We don't discover a lot of really, really big ones. They may look really big on this monitor, but what we're looking at is actually really
tiny stuff. Yeah. And you usually don't find new species in an urban environment. I mean, there are exceptions to that. And in Los Angeles, they have a grant with the LA County Museum that they set up a bunch of malaise traps in people's backyards, and they're finding lots of new species just in urban Los Angeles. So we might have the same thing here in Hawaii. We'll have to get some funding for that and see if that's true. So just let's take a look at some of the things that we got last week. And you can see here on the screen, a lot of the things that you're seeing here are flies. So we got some big flies, and they just happen to be the family that I work on. They're called long-legged flies, Dolichopodidae. And there's some big guys here. These are all invasive species. They're all alien. None of them are native. The smaller ones, the ones that have wings on them, that there's the small ones, these are on the genus called Chrysotis, and it's the males have a long palp that they use, the females use to identify for mating.
Mm-hmm.
They can tell one male from another, and if it's got these really long silvery palps, that's the name of the species is actually Longipalpus.
Oh.
And so it's an introduced species. It gets into hothouses and greenhouses, and we got it in our garden. So it seems to like gardens for some reason.
Now, okay, forgive me, I'm not up on my insect anatomy. What is a palp?
A palp. These are associated with the mouth parts,
okay.
And so they're used for sort of a sensory device.
Okay.
And so they, feeling things as they're eating, or smelling, I guess, maybe better.
Okay, great.
So, and there's some other things here that we got one beetle that showed up in the trap. A number of different ants. We have the big-headed ant, which is a Phaidole megacephala. That's a bad invasive ant. And another one up here is Cardiocondyla. Emerii is the species of that one. We have a winged ant, which is the queens and the drones. Mm-hmm. They come out they swarm and mate. Mm-hmm. And ant workers don't like to use those for identification because they all sort of look alike. They like to use the workers for IDing, so we really don't know what that big one is, even though it's so big.
Oh wow, okay.
But here's a neat little guy. This is what I want to talk about today. It's called a springtail. And I'm going to blow that up.
I don't really see that.
So you can. It's small there, but let's.
And it's nearly transparent too.
Yeah, they're very transparent looking. So that's called a springtail, and the reason they're called a springtail is this structure right here, and this is the head here with the antennae and its legs and the abdomen, and the end of the abdomen is this structure like a tail that's called a furcula, and it's called a springtail because the furcula bends over, and when it wants to hop, it just springs and like a grasshopper, boing, just hops. It makes that sound too.
Oh yeah.
They're really tiny, as you can see. They're like a millimeter, a couple millimeters long, and they're very common in the soil, but not too many people see them because they're tiny, they're innocuous, they don't bite, and they mainly feed on fungus. Mm-hmm. In fact, in one case, I was just reading that they could be possibly used as a biocontrol agent. If they could rear them, introduce them into various areas to get rid of fungus and mildew in areas. So they do serve a good purpose.
Absolutely. You told me a great story before we started about how you became really interested, especially in the springtails. Can you?
Yeah, when I was a little kid, my father asked me to start up the car and warm it up, and our car used to be in a carport, which had a dirt floor. We lived on a ranch, and when I was waiting for the car to warm up, I play around as a kid. You play around in the dirt, and I was seeing these little tiny things hopping around, and I had no idea what they were. I couldn't see them with my naked eye, and so I ran to the house, got a magnifying glass, and looked at them. They were still there, and they were these little things hopping around, and they were springtails, and I didn't know it at the time. So I got some, put them in a jar, brought them to my science teacher at school, and he said, "Oh, those are springtails," and that was one of my first introductions to entomology.
That's fantastic. All right.
So from there, okay, now we've done, we told you about the rough sort. So that's what we do when we're looking at the stuff under the scope. We're going to sort things into flies and beetles and the colembala, and we put them into those vials over here. And then the next step is to try and get those identified to species. Mm-hmm. And that's the difficult part. There's that's where you have to be a specialist to know what the species names are.
Well, especially if it's something this tiny, and I'm sure it being so tiny, it's very varied as well. So you have to really look under the microscope for a long time to differentiate.
Exactly. You have to use the microscope for a lot of those things, and we have keys for those. So I was going to show you here. We've got some identification manuals that we use. This is the Insects of Hawaii series. And for the springtails, it was a fairly recent publication, 20 years ago, which is really recent. And here's some illustrations just showing you the springtails that we have. There's like hundreds of springtails different species that we have in Hawaii. And so there's identification keys in this that we can use then to figure out what that is. There are various characters on each specimen. Maybe the antennae may be long or short, mm-hmm. or it may have on the top of its or the back of its thorax, it may have hairs, certain types of hairs.
Oh, wow.
And so all these things will then key it to a genus. We might be able to get it to a genus level without having to do any dissecting, and maybe a species level if it's really distinctive. But sometimes we actually have to open it up and look at the tiny parts in order to figure out what the species is. So we have a number of these Insects of Hawaii series. This is another one that deals with flies. This is the group that I work on. And the illustrations here, usually they have the illustrations of the characters that we look for that'll distinguish the species. So that's why these manuals are really helpful for us scientists to figure out what the species are.
Now, characteristics that really differentiate, that differ between species, how varied is that? Is it confined in one species, it could just be their legs, or is it their wings?
Yeah, it really depends. That the long-legged flies that I work on, it happens to be a lot of the differentiation between species are on the legs. And so the group that I work on actually have these pretty bizarre modifications, so it's really easy to sort of, once you get under a scope, you can see what species is what, even though there's hundreds of them. Others, they sort of all look alike, and you really have to dissect and get down to the nitty-gritty to figure out what the heck's going on. And what we do after that, once we identify them, if we find out that we've got new species or new records, we then publish.
Oh.
And so what, one thing we should talk about maybe in another episode is the Hawaii Biological Survey, which is a program up at the Bishop Museum, and that's sort of what is giving us our modus operandi. That's what we're here for. Is to the state legislated the Hawaii Biological Survey as a program of the Bishop Museum, and so that's in 1992. And what we've been doing since then is putting out an annual records of the Hawaii Biological Survey, which keeps an inventory of all the plants and animals in Hawaii. So if we find something in these surveys that's something we've never seen before, it's going to go in here, either as a new species or a new record if it's something that's introduced from someplace else.
Fantastic.
So that's some of the scientific publications we do. And those surveys I was talking about that we do for agencies, like the state wants us to go into an area to see if a stream is pristine or not, those types of things. So we do these contract reports as well. So Hawaii Biological Survey does all these things for federal, state, and local agencies, and that's why we are here.
Now, can you access this Hawaii Biological Survey from our website?
Yes, you can. We've got all the articles, all the issues from 1994 on are available for free. Just go to hbs.bishopmuseum.org, and all the publications are there.
Now, I think that feels like a good time to end our Science
I
Never
want to
Sleeps.
go longer.
We'll have you back for another episode, because I am completely fascinated by this. So, thank you for joining us for Science Never Sleeps. Thank you, Neal.
And we have to say happy 4th of July to our American friends.
Oh, absolutely.
And for those that aren't in America, come to America, because we have plenty of hot dogs on the 4th of July.
Oh, my goodness. And apparently we have plenty of flies and springtails.
Yes, we do.
So, if you're looking for more information about the Bishop Museum, please visit bishopmuseum.org and see what new things we have going on. There's something new always happening. And thanks for joining us today on Facebook Live. Here we go.